What if our entire existence, from the good times to the bad, and every thought you ever had, was actually a simulation? According to simulation theory, our perception of physical reality could be nothing more real than the virtual worlds we experience in video games. This has profound implications, particularly when thinking about the weight of suffering. If our lives are just simulations, does it really matter how bad things get? What does it imply for our understanding of pain, ethics, and existence? Nick Bostrom and others in simulation theory came up with the idea that advanced societies could theoretically create realities that were indistinguishable from their own, and that if they did so in large enough numbers, it would be statistically likely that we are living in one. While this idea may sound fantastical, it is based on plausible future developments in computing power and the motivations of. In a physical reality, pain and suffering are associated with biological processes, physical harm, illness, or emotional distress. These experiences carry weight because they are directly related to survival and well-being. However, if our reality is a simulation and our experiences within it are indistinguishable from real ones, the nature of suffering becomes profoundly complicated. This raises the unsettling. One possible explanation for the presence of suffering in simulated worlds is that it enhances the realism of the experience. If the creators of the simulations aim to create a reality that was as close to their own as possible, then suffering could be an inevitable component of that design. After all, life isn't complete without struggle, loss, and hardship. They shape our choices, relationships, and sense of purpose. In this view, suffering could be seen as an intentional aspect of the simulation rather than a defect. On the other hand, it's possible that our suffering, rather than being a flaw, could serve a purpose that we don't even know about. If we are being studied or experimented upon by the entities responsible for creating the simulation, our suffering could be a variable they're watching to learn about the responses of the virtual beings to challenges or how their moral systems and it raises deep ethical questions about the entities or beings running the simulation. If they have the power to eliminate suffering, do they have a moral obligation to do so? In human terms, creating a world filled with pain might seem cruel, but it's also possible that the creators view the simulation differently, as something akin to art, a learning tool, or a system that challenges our understanding of free will and ethics by calling into question whether our actions and choices in a virtual world are really our own or if they are predetermined by the system. If suffering is pre-programmed, then do we have any control over how we feel it or how we help others who are suffering? This raises important questions about the possibility of simulated suffering and the meaning of cruelty. There are complex implications for how we approach suffering in our daily lives when considering whether simulated beings can be held morally accountable. On one hand, seeing suffering as part of a simulation could make it less emotionally impactful, as pain is only a construct and shouldn't be taken seriously. On the other hand, realizing that suffering is programmed into the system could make it more poignant, as it reminds us of our powerlessness over the fundamental. The nature of our reality is paradoxical, because even within the framework of simulation theory, the immediacy of pain, whether from a broken bone, the loss of a loved one, or the sting of rejection, remains profound. This is because, even though our reality is an illusion, our experiences are not diminished. Rather, they remain powerful, vivid, and profoundly meaningful. Another intriguing aspect of simulation theory is the idea that we, as beings capable of understanding our reality, could actively shape it. This idea offers a hopeful dimension, suggesting that even in a virtual world, we could be able to alleviate suffering through our actions, empathy, and creativity. Ultimately, simulation theory compels us to confront deep questions about existence and meaning. Does the fact that our reality is simulated diminish its value or significance? Or does the fact that we experience consciousness, joy, and suffering give it its own unique reality? These are difficult questions with no easy answers, but they serve as a reminder that our actions, our treatment of others, and our attempts to make sense of our lives are unaffected by the nature of our reality. Ultimately, the idea that our reality is a simulation doesn't explain suffering, but it does. Nevertheless, it forces us to reconsider our beliefs about reality, agency, and the human experience. Whether our lives are predetermined by biology or engineered by sophisticated civilization, our experiences are genuine and impact who we are and the world we live in. The red button thought experiment. Picture yourself with a red button on your desk. Pressing it would painlessly wipe humanity off the face of the earth. This thought experiment presents a straightforward yet profound scenario that prompts us to reflect on the meaning of life, the origins of suffering, and the ethical implications of our actions. It starts with the idea that human beings are fundamentally flawed, and it continues by presenting a timeline filled with wars, environmental devastation, inequality, and suffering. Would you press this button? This thought experiment is not about making hasty decisions, but rather about inviting thoughtful contemplation of the complexities of human existence. It forces us to weigh the value of life and asks if the world would be better off without humans, or if our species would alleviate the suffering we cause to ourselves and the planet. Pressing the red button would be a radical solution to this problem. It is worth preserving life despite its flaws, according to some, because it offers opportunities for beauty, love, creativity, and growth. On the other hand, there are many who believe that the widespread suffering endured by humans and non-humans makes these positive aspects of life less important. In order to grapple with this red button, one must also examine the nature of suffering. Philosophers such as Arthur Schopenhauer have argued that life is indeed. From one point of view, the red button could be seen as a compassionate gesture that ends the endless cycle of suffering. On the other hand, there are many who view suffering as an essential component of life, a force that gives it depth and meaning. If we didn't endure suffering, would we ever experience joy, love, or achievement? The thought experiment delves further into the ethics of this decision for humanity. Who has the right to decide whether or not to press the button that would end suffering? There are billions of people in the world, and each of them has a unique experience with life. Some endure great suffering, while others find great value and fulfillment. Pressing the button simplifies this diversity into a yes/no choice, as if one perspective could encompass everyone's experience. Then there's the question of hope. Humanity, for all its imperfections, has demonstrated incredible resilience. Pressing the button would end all of humanity's suffering and its potential for improvement. Given our capacity for change, scientific advancements, social progress, and acts of compassion show that we can solve our problems and make the world a better place. However, for those who are in favor of this action, environmental concerns are a major factor. After all, humans have caused tremendous damage to the planet, threatening the extinction of many species. The Earth could potentially return to its natural balance if humans were to cease polluting ecosystems and changing the climate. However, this begs the question, does the planet have value apart from human perception? Who will be around to see or appreciate the planet's restoration after we're all gone? And is it really important? The thought experiment also prompts us to reflect on our own prejudices and emotions. For example, some people may feel compelled to press the button because they're depressed or frustrated with. For some, abstaining may stem from an innate fear of hurting other people. On the other hand, the red button could be an illusion, a testament not to be pressed, that forces us to examine our own motives and values. Either way, it's a challenge to our self-awareness and our ethical standards. The red button thought experiment isn't so much about the act of pressing or not pressing the button as it is about the questions it raises. It forces us to confront the profound complexity of existence, where suffering, joy, destruction, creation, despair, and hope are all intertwined. By affirming our belief in the worth of existence despite its imperfections, the button becomes a mirror reflecting our hopes, fears, and beliefs about what it means to be human. Profoundly about the essence of existence, the morality of decision-making, and our role in the cosmos. The thought experiment does not aim to offer simple solutions, but rather to encourage introspection by challenging our beliefs and assumptions. In the end, the red button is left unpressed, not because the answer is obvious, but because the strength of the question lies in the process of grappling with its implications. Through this journey of discovery, we gain a better understanding of who we are, our connection to others, and the universe at large. Freedom is the ultimate goal of humanity, but it is also fraught with paradoxes. The paradox of freedom is the conflict between our need for total independence and the limits that inevitably exist to give freedom its meaning. This idea has baffled philosophers, authors, and thinkers for centuries, and it shows that freedom is more complex than it appears. Expectations and a lack of responsibilities may sound thrilling at first, but without structure or boundaries, choices become meaningless and endless. This paradox becomes more apparent when we consider the relationship between freedom and responsibility. Being free means having choices, but with those choices come consequences. True freedom means owning what you choose, not just wishing it away. For example, when a society allows people to speak and act freely, it must also establish accountability systems to prevent harm. These rules, which may appear to limit freedom, are actually what allowed the society to thrive. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension through existentialism, highlighting the burden of freedom. Furthermore, Sartre argued that humans are freedom. In this sense, is both liberating and terrifying because it forces us to face the consequences of our decisions without the safety net of established courses of action. If everything is up for grabs, how can we ever decide what's important or right? SRA thought the solution was to develop our own set of values, but that's a difficult and unsettling process. Another paradox arises when we think about freedom in relation to other people and their relationships. People argue about laws and governance because, although they limit individual behavior, they also create the stability needed for collective freedom. Without laws, society would fall into chaos where the strong dominate the weak, and true freedom becomes impossible for most people. This tension is evident in human interactions because we are inherently social and because true freedom cannot exist in isolation. It interacts paradoxically with desire. When we think of freedom, we usually picture the ability to do whatever we want whenever we want. However, desires can become a kind of addiction, and being obsessed or relentlessly pursuing success can lead to dependency and a loss of autonomy. This idea is central to Stoicism, the philosophy that opposes attachment and encourages action in harmony with one's true self. The paradox of freedom is demonstrated in our modern world's fixation with choice. We live in an era of unparalleled options, with seemingly endless career paths to pursue. However, true freedom does not originate from outside forces, but rather from mastery over our internal states. By practicing self-discipline and concentrating on what we can control, we can break free from being enslaved by external events or emotions. The pursuit of limitless freedom can paradoxically trap us in uncertainty and unfulfillment due to the abundance of options available. Psychologists have discovered that having too many choices can make people feel dissatisfied and exhausted from constantly wondering if a better one was left behind. Cultural and historical contexts further complicate this paradox in many societies, where freedom has been interpreted as liberation from oppression. On a more personal level, the paradox of freedom manifests itself in our relationships with ourselves. We often imagine freedom as the ability to do whatever we want, but occasionally new forms of control and power emerge alongside revolutions that topple oppressive regimes, demonstrating that the quest for freedom is not without its unexpected consequences. Choosing to adhere to certain principles or commitments can give us a sense of purpose that unrestrained freedom cannot, just as practicing for hours every day allows musicians to fully express themselves through their art. Discipline and self-restraint, which might feel like limitations, often lead to meaningful freedom in the long run. The paradox also challenges our perception of technology has the power to both liberate and enslave us. While it enables us to communicate, travel, and access information more freely, it can also be used for surveillance, distraction, or dependence. Social media, for example, allows us to express ourselves freely, but can also lead to addictive behaviors. The paradox of freedom is that it forces us to face the complexity of human existence rather than simplifying it. True freedom is not limitless choice or unfettered action, but rather the capacity to live in harmony with one's principles, to skillfully traverse life's limitations, and to discover significance in the precarious equilibrium between independence and connection. The paradox of freedom is not an issue to be resolved, but rather an acceptance of reality. It invites us to consider. Transhumanism is a movement that aims to utilize technology to overcome the biological limitations of the human body. It asks, what if humanity could take control of its own evolution, enhancing our bodies and minds beyond anything nature ever intended? Instead of diminishing freedom, this paradox enriches it, reminding us that the most profound forms of liberty come from understanding and working within limitations. For centuries, humans have adapted to our environment through natural selection, but transhumanists argue that we are now able to direct our own development and advances in technology, thus redefining what it means to be human. This rapidly expanding field of thought combines philosophy, ethics, and cutting-edge science to envision a future where humans are no longer bound by aging, diseases, or death. Transhumanism aims to eliminate physical vulnerabilities, such as aging, which is often seen as an inevitable part of life. Scientists are already exploring ways to slow down or even reverse the aging process through cellular repair, genetic editing, and other forms of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and neuroscience. These advancements are enabling a fundamental alteration of our lives, thoughts, and interactions with the world. Transhumanism envisions a world where diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease are entirely eradicated. Gene editing tools like CRISPR are being used to correct genetic defects and strengthen immunity. Advances in prosthetics and healthcare are also contributing to this utopian vision. Through therapies that target the root causes of aging, the dream of a significantly extended lifespan or even immortality is no longer outside the realm of possibility. Transhumanism aims to expand human intelligence and cognitive capabilities, just as bioengineering enables the replacement of damaged organs and tissues with more durable and efficient alternatives. One example is the development of brain-computer interfaces, which allow direct communication between our minds and machines. This technology has the potential to enhance memory, problem-solving abilities, creativity, and expression. Imagine a future where, at its core, transhumanism is a philosophy of improvement that emphasizes the instantaneous integration of knowledge into one's mind rather than relying on screens. However, this approach raises serious ethical questions about who will have access to these enhanced capabilities, whether they will be available to everyone, and whether they will further divide society along economic lines. Another ethical concern revolves around the question of identity. As technology becomes more integrated into our bodies and minds, the question arises, where do we draw the line between being human and being a machine? Transhumanists contend that identity is not dependent on biology, but rather on consciousness and experience. However, this perspective challenges long-held notions of what it means to be human and compels us to. Transhumanism also delves into the philosophical realm of purpose and meaning, asking, what would life be like if we could end suffering, prolong life indefinitely, and improve our cognitive abilities? While some see this as a utopian vision of limitless opportunities for growth, exploration, and self-fulfillment, others worry that it would lead to stagnation, boredom, or the loss of humanity's essential character. After all, struggle and limitation are fundamental to the human experience. What happens when those components are eliminated? Some say transhumanism's quest for perfection ignores the unexpected effects of changing complicated biological systems. Others worry that transhumanists' emphasis on enhancement takes attention away from tackling critical global issues like poverty, climate change, and political instability. Transhumanists, however, argue that their goal is not to escape these problems, but to equip humanity to overcome them. The idea of uploading consciousness into a digital format, also called mind uploading, is a contentious part of transhumanism because it has the potential to make us immortal by transferring our thoughts, memories, and personalities into machines. However, this concept is still in its early stages, and it raises serious questions about what it means to be conscious, such as whether a digital copy of your mind is really you or just a copy of some programming. The environmental impact of transhumanism is substantial. While some believe that improving human efficiency, for example by consuming less energy or food, could help reduce the strain on the planet's resources, others warn of the dangers of technological overreach, where unchecked progress could have unexpected effects on ecosystems and biodiversity. Ultimately, transhumanism makes us consider the future of. Transhumanists believe that by pushing the boundaries of what is possible, we can create a future where humanity thrives in ways we cannot imagine today. The journey of transhumanism is just beginning and promises to be both exhilarating and challenging. It's a vision of humanity not as it is, but as we embrace science and technology to redefine ourselves. Are we content to remain as we are, or do we embrace this opportunity to reflect on our values, aspirations, and responsibilities? How we handle the possibilities and dangers of this historic moment will determine whether the future is a liberating one or a dangerous one. The question isn't merely whether we can improve humanity, but whether we should. What kind of future do we want to build together? At its core, the absurd is the idea that life needs meaning, but the universe won't give it. This was explored by the French philosopher Albert Camus. The absurd is not an issue to be solved or a mystery to be solved. Rather, it is an inherent part of being human that we must learn to live with. Camus held the belief that by facing the absurd head-on, we could discover a special kind of happiness and freedom. The absurd stems from our relentless pursuit of answers as a species. We look to religion, philosophy, science, and art for answers to exist, why we suffer, and what it all means. Satisfy this hunger, but no matter how hard we search, the universe remains silent. It does not offer any ultimate answers, grand purpose, or comforting design. This silence can feel like a betrayal, as if the universe is withholding something we are entitled to. Camus argues that this tension between our need for meaning and the universe's indifference is not a failure of existence, but simply the way things are. The absurd is not just a theoretical idea. It is something we encounter in everyday life. Imagine working tirelessly. As we strive for something, sometimes we find that it doesn't bring the satisfaction we were hoping for. Or think about how our days are filled with the same routines. Waking up, eating, working, and sleeping. These moments show us how our expectations don't match reality and how the meaning we seek doesn't fill us up. It's in these moments that the absurdity of life comes into play, not as a dramatic revelation, but as an unsettling reminder of all the contradictions we face. Is something that needs to be faced squarely. When confronted with the absurd, many people try to find a philosophical solution. This happens when people give up on finding meaning in life and instead adhere to predetermined systems, like religious dogma or ideological dogma. In doing so, they give up their freedom and reject the very tension that makes life interesting. Camus rejected this approach, arguing that the absurd should not be ignored or denied. It is worth living for if there is no ultimate purpose. Camus referred to this as the only serious philosophical question. Instead of resigning or despairing, he responded with defiance, arguing that life's value is not diminished by a lack of meaning, but rather that it allows us to create our own meaning. By accepting the absurd, we can live authentically, embracing the transient beauty and chaos of life without pretending it must serve a higher purpose. He used the myth of Copus to further support his point. In Greek mythology, there's a figure named Copus who is doomed to roll a boulder up a hill forever. only to have it roll back down as he gets closer to the top. This seemingly meaningless cycle could be interpreted as a metaphor for despair and futility. But in Camus' view, Coppus represents strength and rebellion. Just as we all face struggles that appear pointless in a universe devoid of inherent meaning. But by accepting his destiny and pushing the boulder forward, Coppus exemplifies resilience and perseverance. Camus concludes his essay by stating, "One must imagine Coppus happy. This vision of happiness is not about denial or false hope, but about finding joy in the act of living itself, even when life offers no guarantees." The absurd reminds us that our lives are ours to shape, without a cosmic plan to follow. We are free to pursue what brings us fulfillment, whether that's love, creativity, or the simple pleasure of being alive. Here, the absurd is not a curse, but an opportunity to live fully. Truthfully, Q's philosophy of the absurd also questions conventional notions of success and failure in an empty universe. What counts is not how much we achieve or how much of a legacy we leave, but how bravely and authentically we live each day. This view frees us from the constraints of conforming to societal norms or pursuing goals that don't truly speak to us. The philosophy of the absurd isn't easy to grasp. Embrace the absurd for what it is, a gift and a challenge. It asks us to face the contradictions of existence head-on, to live with uncertainty and still find joy, and to let go of comforting illusions and face the world as it is. In doing so, it offers a profound form of freedom, while also teaching us to stop searching for answers that do not exist and instead focus on the experience of living. Life, with all its strength, stress, and struggle, becomes an adventure worth living when we embrace the absurd. It wasn't planned, designed, or inevitable. Rather, it is the result of a cosmic accident, an extraordinary chain of events in an uncaring universe that randomly aligned. By embracing the absurd, we reclaim our freedom and discover a happiness that is uniquely ours. From the creation of the first atoms all the way to the realization of consciousness, every step of life is characterized by an element of randomness and improbability. The question then becomes, how does this realization impact our self-perception, our sense of purpose, and the very essence of existence? To comprehend life as a cosmic accident, we must delve into its origins, which can be traced back to approximately 138 billion years ago, when the Big Bang ushered in the universe from an incredibly tiny and extremely hot spot. In those early moments, chaos unfolded as space, time, and matter started to take shape. Within the swirling chaos of the universe, one star formed approximately 46 billion years ago, a relatively ordinary star in a relatively ordinary galaxy. Around it, debris from its creation coalesced into planets, one of which was Earth. This process was not directed or purposeful. Rather, it was driven by the laws of physics and the blind forces of nature. In the end, galaxies and stars were formed as a result of atoms being pulled together by gravity. Life likely started in the oceans as simple organic molecules formed and interacted under specific conditions. Eventually, these molecules gave rise to self-replicating structures, the first primitive forms of life. From there, evolution took over a unique set of circumstances that included a stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, and a temperature range that allowed liquid water to exist again. There was no intention behind this. It was just a cosmic lottery that Earth happened to win. Evolutionary history, including our own conscious beings, could not have emerged if the Big Bang had been slightly different, the Earth's orbit had been slightly closer or farther from the Sun, or if not a single mutation had taken place. However, because this process is based on randomness, only mutations that offer some survival advantage have persisted over billions of years. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for natural processes and numerous coincidences. The conditions that enabled life, and particularly intelligent life, are so implausible that they can feel miraculous. However, there is no proof that any higher power was involved. This realization can evoke mixed feelings. On one hand, it highlights how extraordinary our existence is, And on the other, it can be unsettling because it suggests that intelligent life, let alone life that can contemplate its own. Our origins are so remote from the cosmos that it's hard to fathom how we fit into its grand narrative. The cosmos has been around for billions of years and will be around for billions more after we die. Our lives, our problems, and our civilizations are all but a speck in the vast scheme of things. This perspective makes us wonder, if life is an accident, then what's the point? If the universe doesn't care about us, then what's the point of everything we do? The existentialists see the lack of inherent meaning in life not as a problem, but as an opportunity. They contend that meaning is something we make, not something given to us. The fact that life does not have a predetermined purpose allows us to define it, and scientists find inspiration in the accidental nature of life rather than diminishing it. The randomness of existence, according to Carl Schwann, for example, highlights how remarkable it is. Schwann famously said that humans are made of star stuff, meaning that our body's elements were formed in the cores of dying stars. He found this cosmic connection to be a source of wonder and humility, reminding us that we are small and deeply connected to the universe. Living as a cosmic accident also challenges us to reevaluate our relationship with the world around us. Because if we are all created by chance, then every living thing is. This perspective can help us feel a sense of kinship with all beings. The vast array of life on Earth, from the tiniest microbes to the largest whales, serves as a constant reminder that we are not apart from the natural world, but rather an intricate and transient manifestation of the same forces that gave rise to the stars and galaxies. This perspective can also heighten our sense of personal responsibility as the fate of our planet rests on our collective decisions. In the end, viewing life as a cosmic accident forces us to accept uncertainty, let go of the idea that the universe owes us answers or guarantees, and instead seek beauty and meaning in the randomness of existence. Our lives may not have been planned, but they are ours to live. In a universe that doesn't care about us, the act of living, caring, and wondering becomes a profound expression of existential nihilism, since life has no purpose. Existential nihilism is a philosophy that challenges our comforting illusions and asks us to confront existence as it truly is. Its core principle is that the universe doesn't care about us, and that everything we strive for, including success, love, and knowledge, ultimately dissolves into nothingness. For many, this realization feels like staring into an abyss, where purpose and value crumble under the weight of indifference. Thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Sir gained prominence in the 19th century with their work. Along with Kierkegaard, Fodor, and Dostoevsky, Nietzsche held the view that the fall of established religious and moral systems marked a watershed moment in human history. After God died, society no longer had a guiding principle to keep everyone on the same page, and Nietzsche contended that without a higher power or divine plan, humanity was left to find its way through an empty cosmos. This lack of intrinsic meaning extends beyond big questions about existence. It affects every aspect of human experience. Everything we do in life, the relationships we build, the goals we pursue, none of it matters beyond what we give it meaning. This isn't a sign of hopelessness or pessimism. It's just the way the universe is. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist philosopher often linked with nihilistic views, provided a fresh take on this emptiness by arguing that things have no inherent significance. Life is not a problem to be solved, but rather an acceptance of its inherent freedoms. According to Sartre, humans are born into this state of being free, which means that without a higher power or set of rules to follow, we must find our own way to live our lives and define our own values. This is both an exciting and terrifying prospect, as it leaves us with no one to turn to for guidance, and, for many, an overwhelming feeling of despair. The question of what is the purpose of life has persisted for centuries, causing many to grapple with existential despair. However, There are also those who discover a strange liberation in recognizing that life is purposeless and rejecting imposed meanings. They are able to live authentically, free from societal expectations and the need to conform to arbitrary standards. The flip side of this freedom is that it comes with a price. Its critics often accuse existential nihilism of being overly reductionist and lacking a universal framework for evaluating things like good and bad, worthiness and waste. Nihilism, on the other hand, doesn't tell us how to live or what to value, but it does force us to confront our own capacity for meaning-making. For some, this leads to a deeper appreciation of life's fleeting moments, like sunsets, shared laughs, and quiet walks, for exactly this reason. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky examines the moral consequences of a godless world, questioning whether humanity can uphold morality in the absence of divine authority. Albert Camus, who is not explicitly a nihilist, tackled similar themes in his concept of the absurd, the tension between nihilism and other worldviews leading to profound creativity, insight, and novelistic works. Camus famously pondered the question of whether life is worth living in light of the universe's apparent lack of interest in us. Rather than giving up, he advocated embracing life's paradoxes, as in the myth of Copus, where he argued that we should picture Copus relegated to a life of meaningless boulder rolling. In this view, continuing to live despite this emptiness becomes a form of rebellion against existential nihilism, which fails to provide any answers, comfort, or promise. Imagine a world devoid of illusions, where we are confronted with the stark reality of existence. While this reality can be paralyzing for some, it also serves as a powerful inspiration to create, act, and live life to the fullest, all in the face of the impermanence of life. In the end, existential nihilism leaves us with a paradox. By denying inherent meaning, it forces us to recognize the immense power we have to shape our own lives. It also leads us to question the existence of cosmic purpose, which can be both empowering and overwhelming. This star perspective is central to philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that questions the optimism commonly linked to human existence. Rather than denying the worth of existence, it redirects our attention to the present moment, our decisions, and the connections we cultivate. It is both a burden and an advantage, serving as a reminder that although the universe may be apathetic, our lives are under our control. The foundations of philosophical pessimism are often traced back to the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. According to Schopenhauer, the will to live is a blind, insatiable force that drives all living beings. This will manifest as endless striving, where every desire is fulfilled by creating a cycle of another. Frustration and fleeting satisfaction. According to Schopenhauer, this never-ending striving is not only draining, but also futile, because it keeps people unhappy and hurt. Schopenhauer believed that all living things are inherently painful. After all, we're all prey to predators, and while we may experience fleeting moments of pleasure or happiness, they too are fleeting. These transient joys, in Schopenhauer's view, are not proof of life's worth, but rather temporary distractions from the grim reality. Friedrich Nietzsche, who is often linked to existentialism, was another prominent figure in philosophical pessimism. Nietzsche offered a philosophy of information that contradicted Schopenhauer's acceptance of suffering as inevitable, arguing instead that we should embrace life's struggles and chaos. Philosophical pessimism finds resonance in the works of Romanian philosopher Emil Sorin, who took a deeply personal approach to the theme of suffering. Sorin's writing is filled with reflections on the absurdity of existence, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of human aspirations. He described life as a series of inevitable setbacks, but rather than despair, it calls for a reevaluation of how we confront and interpret these difficulties. Ongoing battle against hopelessness, where fleeting moments of clarity expose the hollowness beneath our pursuits. Core pessimism served more as a prism through which to view life more clearly. A striking feature of philosophical pessimism is its criticism of progress. While many hold fast to the idea of continuous improvement, whether through society, technology, or personal growth, philosophical pessimists cast doubt on this narrative, arguing that while external factors may alter the fundamental, philosophical pessimism challenges the pursuit of happiness as a primary goal, arguing that an overemphasis on happiness's attainment frequently leads to greater disappointment due to its ephemeral and fleeting nature. Technological advancements, while improving living conditions, nonetheless fail to eradicate existential suffering or the constraints of mortality. One way philosophical pessimism offers solace is by emphasizing solidarity in suffering. It fosters a sense of connection and compassion by recognizing that pain and struggle are universal experiences. If suffering is an inevitable part of life, then our shared experiences allow us to cope with it better. Rather than chasing an idealized state of contentment, pessimists encourage us to accept the imperfections and limitations of life. This acceptance does not mean giving up, but rather learning to navigate existence without the constant pressure to find ultimate fulfillment. A world that often celebrates positivity and success can benefit from philosophical pessimism, which reminds us that struggle is a real and valid part of existence. It helps us approach life with realism, acknowledging its difficulties without becoming overly idealistic or simplistic. Vulnerability can be a source of empathy and understanding, and this perspective encourages us to care for one another as we navigate life's challenges together. Critics of philosophical pessimism frequently claim that it is defeatist or excessively pessimistic. However, in this regard, pessimism can serve as a stabilizing force, allowing us to keep perspective when confronted with adversity. They argue that focusing on life's struggles risks ignoring its beauty, joy, and potential. However, many pessimists would disagree with this characterization. They don't deny that beauty and joy exist. They simply refuse to ignore the suffering that accompanies them. For pessimists, acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience, including its darker aspects, is essential to understanding and appreciating life. Philosophical pessimism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting illusions. It doesn't promise a better future or a hidden purpose behind life's struggles. Instead, it challenges us to confront existence as it is without sugarcoating or avoidance. This confrontation, while difficult, can also be liberating. By letting go of unrealistic expectations, we can engage with life on its own terms, finding meaning in the act of living itself. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism is not a philosophy of despair, but one of honesty. It asks us to look at life without flinching, to acknowledge its hardships without turning away. In doing so, it offers a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, a mix of pain, joy, hope, and doubt, all bound together in the complex, unrelenting experience of existence. The problem of suffering. Why does suffering exist if we live in a world capable of producing beauty, joy, and love? Why is it also filled with pain, loss, and cruelty? This question, known as the problem of suffering, has haunted humanity for centuries. It challenges our understanding of existence, morality, and even the nature of the universe itself. At its core, the problem of suffering is not just about why suffering occurs, but what it means and how we should respond to it. Suffering takes many forms, from the physical pain of injury to the emotional anguish of heartbreak or loss. It is an undeniable part of the human condition, woven into the fabric of existence. But what makes suffering so perplexing is its universality. No one is exempt from it, whether rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Every sentient being experiences suffering in some form. This shared reality raises profound questions. Is suffering necessary? Is it random? Or is there a deeper purpose behind it? Philosophers and thinkers have approached the problem of suffering in different ways. For those who believe in a higher power, suffering poses a theological challenge. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does he allow suffering to exist? This question, often referred to as the problem of evil, has led to centuries of debate. Some argue that suffering is a test of faith or a tool for spiritual growth. Others suggest it is a consequence of human free will a necessary byproduct of our ability to choose, yet these answers often feel incomplete. They might explain some instances of suffering, but fall short when faced with the sheer scale of pain in the world natural. Disasters, disease, and tragedies that seem to strike without reason. Secular perspectives on suffering often focus on its biological and evolutionary roots. Pain, for instance, serves an important function in alerting organisms to danger. Without the ability to feel pain, a person might not withdraw their hand from a fire or recognize the symptoms of an illness. Emotional suffering, too, has its roots in survival. Fear keeps us safe from threats, while grief helps us process loss and move forward. From this perspective, suffering is not a cosmic punishment or moral failing, but a necessary part of life's design. Yet, understanding the purpose of suffering doesn't make it any easier to endure. It still leaves us questioning why life must be built on such a fragile foundation. Existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre viewed suffering as an inevitable part of life, one that challenges us to find meaning in an indifferent universe. Inch famously said, "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." For him, suffering was not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced and overcome, a crucible through which we forge strength and purpose. Sartre, on the other hand, saw suffering as a consequence of human freedom. Our ability to make choices, to hope and dream, inevitably exposes us to disappointment and despair. In this view, suffering is inseparable from the human experience. It is the price we pay for the richness of life. Another approach to the problem of suffering comes from Buddhist philosophy, which places suffering at the center of its teachings. The Buddha identified suffering, or dukkha, as the first of the Four Noble Truths. According to Buddhism, suffering arises from desire and attachment. Our cravings for pleasure, permanence, and control. These desires are in conflict with the impermanent and ever-changing nature of reality, leading to frustration and pain. The Buddhist path offers a way to reduce suffering through mindfulness, ethical living, and the cultivation of wisdom. While it doesn't eliminate all pain, it provides tools for understanding and managing it, offering a path to inner peace. Modern psychology also sheds light on the problem of suffering, exploring how our minds interpret and amplify pain. Research shows that much of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. For example, losing a job is undeniably difficult, but the suffering is often compounded by thoughts like "I'm a failure" or "I'll never succeed." Cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness practices aim to break these patterns, helping individuals reframe their experiences and reduce the emotional toll of suffering. In recent years, the problem of suffering has taken on new dimensions with the rise of artificial intelligence and transhumanism. Some thinkers argue that suffering could one day be eliminated through technology, whether by re-engineering the human brain or creating digital environments free of pain. While this vision raises ethical and philosophical questions, it also challenges the assumption that suffering is an inevitable part of life. If we could eliminate suffering, should we, or does suffering serve a deeper purpose that we would lose in the process? Ultimately, the problem of suffering is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a deeply personal question. Each of us confronts suffering in our own lives, grappling with its meaning and impact. Some find solace in faith or philosophy, others in the support of loved ones or the pursuit of justice. What unites us is the shared experience of wrestling with pain, the search for meaning and hardship, and the hope for something better. Suffering is a paradox. It is both universal and deeply individual, both necessary and unbearable. It reveals the fragility of life, but also its resilience. While we may never fully solve the problem of suffering, the ways we confront it shape who we are and how we live. Perhaps the greatest lesson of suffering is its ability to connect us, to remind us of our shared humanity, and to inspire compassion, courage, and the relentless pursuit of understanding the meaning of suffering. Suffering is inevitable. It touches every life in every corner of the world, leaving no one untouched. But why does it exist? Is it merely a cruel accident of life, or does it serve a deeper purpose? The question of the meaning of suffering has haunted humanity for millennia, inspiring some of our most profound philosophies, religions, and works of art. At its core, suffering raises questions about existence itself. Why must living beings endure pain, loss, and despair? For many, suffering seems to undermine the very idea of a just or meaningful universe, and yet some argue that suffering is not just an unfortunate byproduct of existence, but a force that shapes us, challenges us, and paradoxically gives life depth and meaning. One of the most influential perspectives on suffering comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who saw pain as an unavoidable part of the human experience. He argued that understanding the nature of suffering could help us manage it. For Epicurus, much of our suffering comes from fear of death, fear of pain, fear of the unknown. By confronting these fears, heeding and recognizing their limits, we can reduce the hold they have over us. This isn't to say we eliminate suffering entirely, but we learn to navigate it with greater clarity. Religious traditions also provide powerful interpretations of suffering. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as a test of faith or a path to redemption. The story of Job, for example, explores the endurance of a man who loses everything yet continues to trust in God. Through his trials, Job's suffering becomes a means of deepening his relationship with the divine, even if the reasons for his pain remain incomprehensible. This perspective doesn't necessarily explain suffering, but it reframes it as something that can transform and elevate the human spirit. In Buddhism, suffering is placed at the center of its teachings. The First Noble Truth states that life is marked by suffering or dukkha caused by desire and attachment. This suffering is not seen as punishment, but as a natural consequence of craving permanence in an impermanent world. The Buddha's path to enlightenment offers a way to transcend suffering, not by avoiding it, but by understanding its roots and learning to let go. This approach views suffering as a teacher, guiding us toward insight and liberation. For existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, suffering is an essential part of growth and self-discovery. Nietzsche famously declared that which does not kill us makes us stronger. He believed that suffering was not to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and creativity. Life's greatest challenges, he argued, force us to confront our limitations and push beyond them, transforming pain into power. Nietzsche's suffering was not just a condition to endure, but a force that could fuel human greatness. But not everyone agrees that suffering has meaning. For many, nihilist suffering is simply a fact of life, random, meaningless, and indif. It has no deeper purpose, no cosmic justification. This perspective can be both freeing and unsettling. On the one hand, it absolves us of the need to find meaning in our pain. On the other, it leaves us with the daunting task of facing suffering without the comfort of larger narratives. Nihilism challenges us to create our own meaning in a universe that offers none. Modern psychology offers yet another perspective, focusing on how humans process and respond to suffering. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote extensively about the meaning of suffering in his book Man's Search for Meaning. Drawing on his experiences in concentration camps, Frankl argued that while we cannot always control the suffering we endure, we can choose how we respond to it. For Frankl, the ability to find meaning even in the darkest circumstances is what defines humanity. He saw suffering as an opportunity to rise above our circumstances and affirm the value of life. Science, too, sheds light on the nature of suffering, particularly its role in evolution. Pain serves as a survival mechanism, warning us of danger and helping us avoid harm. Emotional suffering, such as grief or loneliness, strengthens social bonds and promotes cooperation, which are essential for the survival of social species. While these explanations don't offer moral or philosophical meaning, they reveal suffering as an integral part of life's design, shaping the way we interact with the world and each other. Into the modern world, where suffering often feels overwhelming, wars, pandemics, environmental crises, it's easy to see it as an insurmountable burden. Yet some argue that suffering can inspire acts of compassion and solidarity. In moments of Collective hardship people often come together to support one another, finding strength and meaning in shared humanity. This doesn't erase the pain, but transforms it into something that connects and uplifts. Suffering forces us to ask difficult questions. It challenges our assumptions, tests our resilience, and compels us to confront the fragility of life. Whether we find meaning in it or not, suffering remains one of the most profound and universal aspects of existence. It is a mirror reflecting our vulnerability and a crucible in which our character is forged. Ultimately, the meaning of suffering is deeply personal for some. It is a source of spiritual growth for others. It is a reminder of life's harsh indifference. And for many, it is simply an undeniable fact of existence that must be faced and endured. What unites all these perspectives is the recognition that suffering, though painful, is an integral part of being alive. In understanding it, we come closer to understanding ourselves in the complex, fragile, and extraordinary experience of life. The repugnant conclusion, what if a world filled with billions of people living lives barely worth living, is considered morally better than a smaller world where everyone experiences true happiness? This is the unsettling paradox known as the repugnant conclusion, a concept introduced by philosopher Dara Parfit in his book Reasons and Persons. It challenges our deepest intuitions about what makes a world morally good and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the way we think about happiness, population, and ethics. The repugnant conclusion emerges from a specific line of reasoning in utilitarian population ethics, which focuses on maximizing total happiness. Imagine a society with a small population of people who all live exceptionally good lives. Now consider adding more people to that society, each with a life that is less fulfilling but still worth living. As the population grows, the average quality of life decreases, but the total amount of happiness increases because more people are experiencing positive lives. If this logic is carried to its extreme, we end up with a world where billions of people live lives of minimal happiness, and yet this world is considered morally better because the total happiness outweighs the lower quality of individual lives. This conclusion is deeply counterintuitive. It seems absurd to suggest that a world where everyone is barely surviving could be better than one filled with deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives. Yet, under a strict utilitarian framework that prioritizes total happiness, this is the outcome. The repugnant conclusion forces us to question whether our moral instincts align with our philosophical principles. One reason the repugnant conclusion feels so troubling is that it reduces lives to numbers. By focusing on the total sum of happiness, it treats people as interchangeable units of value rather than unique individuals with rich, complex experiences. This abstraction ignores the depth and diversity of human life, raising questions about whether happiness can truly be measured in such a simplistic way. Can the joy of a deeply fulfilling life be equated to the shallow contentment of many lives barely worth living? Philosophers have offered various responses to the repugnant conclusion. Some argue that the problem lies with utilitarianism itself. By focusing solely on maximizing happiness, utilitarianism fails to account for other values, such as fairness, dignity, or the importance of individual flourishing. These critics suggest that we need a more nuanced ethical framework that balances the quantity of happiness with its quality. Others, like Parfit himself, have explored alternative approaches to population ethics. One proposal is the average utility principle, which prioritizes the average level of happiness in a society rather than the total amount. Under this principle, a smaller population with higher average happiness would be considered better than a larger population with lower average happiness. While this approach avoids the repugnant conclusion, it introduces its own set of problems. For example, it might justify actions that reduce the number of people in a society to artificially raise the average happiness, even if doing so causes harm. Another response to the repugnant conclusion is to question whether adding new people to the world has moral value at all. Some philosophers argue that morality should focus on improving the lives of existing individuals rather than creating new ones. This perspective challenges the assumption that bringing more people into existence automatically adds value to the world. It suggests that what matters is not how many people are happy, but how well those who already exist are able to live the repugnant conclusion also has implications for real-world decisions about population and resources. For example, in discussions about global development policy, makers often face trade-offs between improving the quality of life for a smaller number of people and providing basic needs for a larger population. The logic of the repugnant conclusion could be used to justify prioritizing sheer numbers. Even if it results in widespread mediocrity, this raises ethical questions about how we balance the well-being of current and future generations. Parfit's work on the repugnant conclusion has influenced a wide range of philosophical debates, from the ethics of procreation to the moral responsibilities of governments and international organizations. It challenges us to think critically about the values we prioritize and the assumptions underlying our moral reasoning. Is happiness an objective measure of a good life, or is it too simplistic to capture the complexities of human experience? How do we weigh the needs of individuals against the needs of the collective, and what responsibilities do we have to those who do not yet exist? At its core, the repugnant conclusion is not just a paradox, but a mirror that reflects the inconsistencies in our moral thinking. It forces us to confront the tension between our intuitive judgments and the implications of our ethical theories. By grappling with this paradox, we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and limitations of moral philosophy, and we are reminded that the pursuit of a better world often raises more questions than answers. Existential loneliness, no matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there is a part of us that remains fundamentally alone. This is existential loneliness, the deep, pervasive sense of solitude that stems not from the absence of others, but from a nature of existence itself. It is the recognition that as individuals we are ultimately is olat. In our inner experiences, carrying the weight of our existence alone. Existential loneliness is not about being physically alone. It's not the same as social isolation or the temporary feeling of missing someone. Instead, it's rooted in the realization that no one can fully understand or share the entirety of another person's inner world, no matter how well we articulate our thoughts or how closely we connect with someone. Our subjective experiences remain uniquely ours. This inherent separateness is a condition of being human. Philosophers and writers have long grappled with this profound sense of isolation. Søren Kierkegaard, often regarded as the father of existentialism, spoke of the individual's relationship to existence as a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was essential for personal growth and authenticity. For Kierkegaard, the individual must face the truth of their aloneness to live a meaningful and authentic life. In this sense, existential loneliness is not just a burden, it is also a call to engage with oneself deeply and honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche explored a similar idea through his concept of the Übermensch, or Overman. He saw the journey towards self-realization as inherently solitary, requiring individuals to transcend societal norms and find their own values. For Nietzsche, existential loneliness was a necessary part of this process. It was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and individuality. The loneliness of standing apart from the crowd, of forging one's own path, was central to his vision of a fulfilled life. Existential loneliness is also tied to our awareness of mortality. As conscious beings, we understand that our lives are finite and no one else can share the experience of our death. This knowledge creates a profound sense of solitude, as we realize that we alone must face the uncertainty of what lies beyond. For Martin Heidegger, this awareness of mortality was central to the human condition. He described the concept of being toward death, emphasizing that the inevitability of death shapes how we live and how we confront our own existence. Existential loneliness in this context is inescapable, is woven into our awareness of life's fragility. At the same time, existential loneliness can be a source of creativity. and insight writers, artists, and thinkers have often drawn on their experiences of isolation to create works that resonate deeply with others. Franz Kafka's writings, for instance, reflect a profound sense of alienation and solitude, yet they speak to universal feelings of disconnectedness. Paradox highlights one of the unique aspects of existential loneliness. While it is deeply personal, it is also a shared human experience. In acknowledging our isolation, we find a strange form of connection with others who feel the same. Existential loneliness also raises questions about the nature of relationships. Can we ever truly know another person, or are our connections ultimately limited by the boundaries of our own subjectivity gene? Paul Sartre explored this tension in his existential philosophy, particularly in his Plano. Exit. He argued that while we crave connection, we often misunderstand or objectify others in our attempts to bridge the gap between ourselves and them. For Sartre, the struggle to connect authentically is an inevitable part of the human condition, yet existential loneliness is not necessarily something to overcome or fix. Many existentialists see it as an opportunity to confront the deeper truths of life. By acknowledging our aloneness, we are forced to grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and identity on our own terms. This can be a source of anxiety, but can also lead to profound self-discovery and growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a challenge and a gift. It pushes us to seek understanding and authenticity in a world that often feels disconnected. Modern psychology has also explored the impact of existential loneliness on mental health and well-being. Some researchers argue that acknowledging and accepting this form of loneliness can be a pathway to resilience and self-acceptance. By understanding that existential loneliness is a natural part of life, we can move away from feelings of inadequacy or despair and focus on building meaningful connections with others. These connections may not erase our loneliness, but they can provide comfort and a sense of shared humanity. Existential loneliness is a reminder of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It forces us to face the fact that no one else can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings, but it also reminds us of the value of connection, empathy, and understanding. While we may never fully bridge the gap between ourselves and others, the attempt to do so is what makes relationships meaningful. In the end, existential loneliness is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It is simply part of what it means to be human. It challenges us to look inward, to confront our fears and uncertainties, and to find our own paths in a complex and often confusing world. By embracing our aloneness, we can learn to live with greater authenticity and openness, finding meaning not in escaping loneliness, but in facing it with courage and compassion. Misanthropy in philosophy. Humanity is flawed, perhaps so flawed that some philosophers have questioned whether it deserves its place in the world. Misanthropy, or the distrust and critique of humanity, has long been a theme in philosophy, challenging our understanding of ourselves, our values, and our impact on the world. It is not about hating individual people, but about questioning the collective nature of humanity, its tendencies, choices, and the consequences of its actions. Philosophical misanthropy is not simply cynicism or bitterness. It is a serious critique of human nature. It examines the ways in which humanity falls short of its ideals, often focusing on the harm we inflict on ourselves, others, and the planet. For thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, misanthropy stemmed from a deep skepticism about human behavior. Schopenhauer saw humanity as driven by the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that leads to constant striving, competition, and suffering. He argued that human beings, far from being rational or virtuous, are largely governed by selfishness and irrational desires. Friedrich Inch, another pivotal figure, approached misanthropy differently. While Inch criticized humanity for its herd mentality and its tendency to cling to comfort and mediocrity, he did not reject humanity outright. Instead, he saw these flaws as challenges to overcome. Nietzsche's misanthropy was not a dismissal of humanity, but a call for transformation, a demand that we confront our limitations and strive to become better versions of ourselves. Philosophical misanthropy often emerges from a sense of disappointment. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes of Cop, a key figure in cynicism, is remembered for his sharp critiques of human hypocrisy and vanity. He is said to have wandered the streets with a lantern searching for an honest man. Diogenes rejected the social conventions and materialism of his time, believing that humanity's pursuit of wealth, power, and status had corrupted its moral character. His misanthropy wasn't rooted in hatred but in frustration with humanity's failure to live authentically and virtuously. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a more hopeful thinker, also expressed misanthropic ideas in his critique of civilization. Rousseau believed that humanity was inherently good in its natural state, but had been corrupted by society. He argued that the pursuit of progress and modernity had alienated people from their true nature, leading to inequality, greed, and moral decay. While Rousseau's misanthropy was directed at the collective flaws of civilization, it carried an underlying belief in the possibility of redemption through a return to simplicity and connection with nature. Modern misanthropic philosophy often focuses on humanity's impact on the planet. Environmental philosophers like Arnce and thinkers associated with the deep ecology movement argue that humanity's exploitation of nature reflects a dangerous anthropocentrism. This perspective sees humanity as a destructive force, prioritizing its own interests at the expense of other species and ecosystems. While not all environmentalists are misanthropes, this critique of humanity's role in ecological crisis aligns with misanthropy. Broader distrust of human behavior. Misanthropy can also take an existential turn, questioning whether humanity's existence has any inherent value. Emile Corinne, a 20th century philosopher, wrote extensively about the absurdity and futility of human life. For Corinne, humanity's relentless pursuit of meaning often masked its deeper flaws, its arrogance, destructiveness, and inability to confront its limitations. Yet Soren's work also reveals a dark humor and a recognition of the resilience and contradictions of the human condition. Critics of philosophical misanthropy often argue that it is overly harsh or dismissive of humanity's potential. They point to acts of kindness, creativity, and progress as evidence that humanity is capable of greatness, while misanthropy highlights humanity's failures at risks, overlooking its capacity for compassion, innovation, and resilience. However, many misanthropic philosophers would counter that their critique is not an absolute condemnation, but an attempt to confront uncomfortable truths. By acknowledging humanity's flaws, they argue, we can begin to address them. One of the most challenging aspects of misanthropy is its moral implications. If humanity is fundamentally flawed, what should we do about it? Should we strive to change, or should we accept our limitations? Philosophers like Nietzsche saw misanthropy as a call to action, urging humanity to overcome its weaknesses and embrace its potential. Others like Schopenhauer lean toward resignation, viewing the flaws of humanity as inherent and unchangeable. Philosophical misanthropy forces us to grapple with difficult questions about our nature and our future. Are our flaws a product of circumstance, or are they inherent to who we are? Can we rise above our tendencies towards selfishness, violence, and destruction, or are these traits inseparable from our humanity? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are vital for understanding the human condition. Ultimately, misanthropy and philosophy is not about rejecting humanity, but about holding a mirror to it. It asks us to confront our failures, question our assumptions, and rethink what it means to be human, whether it leads to despair, hope, or transformation. Philosophical misanthropy challenges us to take a hard look at ourselves and consider how we can do better in doing so. It invites us not to turn away from humanity, but to engage with it more honestly and thoughtfully than ever before. Eco-philosophy. Humanity has built a world that often forgets its roots. Cities rise, resources are extracted, and ecosystems are reshaped, all to serve human needs. But at what cost? Eco-philosophy and deep ecology challenge this way of thinking, urging us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world. They confront the assumption that humans are the center of existence, placing all life forms and ecosystems on equal footing. Eco-philosophy is a broad field that explores the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions of the environment. It's not just about preserving nature. It's about rethinking how we perceive and interact with the world around us. It challenges the anthropocentric mindset, the belief that humans are superior to other life forms and that nature exists solely for our use. Instead, eco-philosophy proposes a holistic view of life, where humans are seen as one part of a vast, interconnected web. One of the most influential movements within eco-philosophy is deep ecology, a term coined by Norwegian philosopher Are NCE in the 1970s. Deep ecology goes beyond the surface-level concerns of traditional environmentalism, such as pollution and resource management. While these issues are important, deep ecology argues that they treat symptoms rather than addressing the root cause of environmental degradation, humanity's flawed relationship with nature. Deep ecology asks us to shift from a shallow utilitarian view of the environment to a deeper understanding of the intrinsic value of all living beings. Under this framework, a tree is not valuable because it provides wood or absorbs carbon dioxide. It is valuable simply because it exists. This perspective challenges the exploitative mindset that has driven much of human progress, inviting us to see the natural world as a community to which we belong rather than a resource to be used. At the heart of deep ecology is the principle of biocentric equality, the idea that all living things have an equal right to live and flourish. This doesn't mean humans should abandon their needs or desires, but it does call for a radical reevaluation of our priorities. It asks us to consider the impact of our actions on the entire web of life, not just on ourselves. By recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, deep ecology seeks to foster a sense of humility and responsibility. The implications of deep ecology are profound. It challenges the economic systems that prioritize growth and consumption over ecological balance. It questions the narratives of human exceptionalism that have justified the destruction of habitats and species, and it calls for a transformation in how we approach everything from agriculture to energy production, emphasizing sustainability and coexistence over exploitation. Philosophers and activists within the deep ecology movement often highlight the spiritual dimensions of this perspective. They argue that reconnecting with nature is not just an ecological necessity, but a path to personal and collective well-being. Many indigenous traditions, for example, have long embraced the idea that humans are part of a larger natural order with responsibilities to the land and its inhabitants. Deep ecology draws inspiration from these worldviews, seeking to integrate them into modern environmental thought. Critics of deep ecology sometimes argue that its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political interests. They question whether humanity can truly prioritize the needs of ecosystems over its own short-term goals. Others worry that deep ecology's emphasis on biocentric equality could lead to difficult ethical dilemmas, such as how to balance human survival with the protection of other species. These criticisms highlight the tension between deep ecology's vision and the realities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology offers a powerful lens through which to view the environmental crises of our time. It reminds us that the destruction of ecosystems is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral and philosophical failure. By treating nature as a commodity, we undermine the very systems that sustain life. Deep ecology invites us to imagine a different future, one where humanity lives in harmony with the earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology also provide practical guidance for individuals and communities. They encourage local sustainable practices that reduce harm to the environment. They promote education and awareness about the interdependence of life, and they inspire grassroots movements that challenge the systems and policies driving ecological destruction. These efforts may not solve every problem, but They represent a crucial step toward aligning human activities with the principles of deep ecology, perhaps the most radical aspect of eco-philosophy and deep ecology is their call for a shift in consciousness. They ask us to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves and instead recognize that we are deeply embedded within it. This shift is not easy. It requires confronting long-held beliefs, rethinking our values, and accepting that humanity is not the pinnacle of life, but one part of a larger whole. In a world facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, the ideas of eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to look beyond immediate solutions and address the deeper issues at the heart of the environmental crisis. They remind us that the health of the planet is inseparable from our own well-being, and that by caring for the Earth, we are ultimately caring for ourselves. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology may not offer quick fixes, but they provide a vision of what is possible, a world where humanity learns to live within its means, respects the rights of all beings, and finds meaning not in domination, but in connection. This vision is both a challenge and an invitation, calling us to rethink what it means to be human in a world that is infinitely larger and more complex than ourselves. The hedonistic treadmill happiness always seems just out of reach. We chase new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and tell ourselves that if we only had more money, more success, more love, we'd finally be content. But when we get those things, the satisfaction fades and the cycle begins again. This endless pursuit is what psychologists call the hedonistic treadmill, a concept that reveals how our search for happiness often keeps us running in place. The hedonistic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation, refers to our tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness no matter what happens in our lives. When we achieve something we've long desired, a new job, a raise, a relationship, it brings a surge of happiness, but over time that excitement fades as we adapt to the change. Similarly, negative experiences like losing a job or going through a breakup often cause an initial drop in happiness, but we eventually recover and return to our baseline. This cycle isn't just anecdotal, it's backed by research. Studies have shown that even life-altering events like winning the lottery or experiencing a serious injury don't have as lasting an impact on happiness as we might expect. People who win millions often find themselves no happier a year later than they were before. Similarly, those who experience setbacks frequently adapt to their new circumstances and find ways to regain their sense of well-being. This doesn't mean that happiness is impossible to achieve, but it does mean that our expectations about what will make us happy are often misguided. We imagine that external changes, wealth, status, possessions will transform our lives, but the truth is more complicated as we adapt to new circumstances. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary. The dream house becomes just a house. The dream job becomes just work. This adaptation is part of what keeps us on the treadmill, constantly searching for the next thing that might finally bring lasting fulfillment. The hedonistic treadmill is rooted in human evolution. Our ancestors lived in environments where survival depended on continuous effort. Staying alive required constantly seeking food, shelter, and safety, and those who became complacent were less likely to pass on their genes. This drive for more served us well in the past, but in modern society, it often leaves us feeling unsatisfied. No matter how much we achieve or acquire, it never seems to be enough. Understanding the hedonistic treadmill can help us break free from its grip. One important insight is that material wealth and external success have diminishing returns when it comes to happiness. Research shows that while money can improve well-being up to a certain point by meeting basic needs and reducing financial stress, beyond that, its impact on happiness is minimal. After achieving financial stability, accumulating more wealth doesn't significantly increase life satisfaction, yet many of us continue to chase it, believing it holds the key to happiness. Another way to step off the treadmill is to focus on experiences rather than possessions. Studies suggest that experiences like traveling or spending time with loved ones bring more lasting happiness than material goods. This is partly because experiences create memories and deepen our connections with others, while possessions tend to lose their novelty over time. Investing in relationships personal growth, and meaningful activities can bring a sense of fulfillment that material success often fails to provide. Gratitude is another powerful tool for countering the effects of hedonic adaptation. By actively appreciating what we already have, we can shift our focus from what's missing to what's present. Practicing gratitude has been shown to increase happiness, reduce stress, and improve relationships. It reminds us that contentment doesn't come from acquiring more, but from valuing what's already in our lives. Mindfulness also plays a key role in breaking free from the hedonistic treadmill. By cultivating awareness of the present moment, we can learn to appreciate the simple pleasures of life without constantly striving for more. Mindfulness helps us recognize when we're caught in the cycle of wanting and reminds us that happiness is not a destination, but a state of being. While the hedonistic treadmill highlights the challenges of maintaining happiness, it also reveals our resilience. Our ability to adapt to both positive and negative experiences is a testament to the human capacity for growth and recovery. Life will always bring ups and downs, but understanding how hedonic adaptation works can help us approach these fluctuations with greater awareness and balance. The hedonistic treadmill doesn't mean we should stop striving or setting goals. Ambition and progress are essential parts of life, but it does challenge us to rethink why we pursue certain things and whether they truly bring the satisfaction we seek. It invites us to step back and ask whether we're running towards something meaningful or simply running in circles. Ultimately, the treadmill isn't about the things we chase, it's about how we engage with life. By shifting our focus from external achievements to internal contentment, we can begin to move away from the endless cycle of striving and toward a deeper, more lasting sense of happiness. The treadmill may be a part of human nature, but with awareness and intention, we can learn to walk at our own pace, savoring the journey instead of endlessly chasing the finish line. Negative utilitarianism. Imagine a world where the ultimate moral goal is not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering. This is the foundation of negative utilitarianism, a striking and controversial ethical framework unlike traditional utilitarianism, which focuses on increasing the overall amount of happiness. Negative utilitarianism zeroes in on suffering as the central moral issue, arguing that the reduction or elimination of pain should take precedence over the pursuit of pleasure. The roots of negative utilitarianism lie in the recognition that suffering is uniquely powerful. While happiness can enhance life, suffering often imposes a much deeper and more urgent moral demand. A moment of pleasure might be fleeting, but pain, whether physical or emotional, can dominate a person's existence. The philosopher Karl Popper, one of the early proponents of this view, argued that the avoidance of misery and suffering should take priority over increasing happiness because alleviating pain directly improves the quality of life for those who are suffering. Negative utilitarianism challenges us to think critically about the value we place on happiness versus the importance of alleviating pain. In many situations, focusing on reducing suffering seems straightforward and intuitive, providing food and shelter to those in need, offering medical care to the sick, or addressing mental health crisis are clear examples of actions that align with this framework. These interventions directly alleviate suffering and improve well-being, but negative utilitarianism extends beyond individual cases and asks us to think on a broader, even existential scale. One of the more controversial aspects of negative utilitarianism is the implication that if suffering outweighs happiness in the world, drastic actions might be morally justified to prevent further suffering. For instance, some interpretations suggest that if life itself inevitably brings suffering, the moral thing to do might be to prevent future lives from coming into existence. This idea aligns with antinatalist philosophies, which argue against procreation on the grounds that it prevents potential suffering. Such arguments force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence and the ethics of creating life in a world where pain is unavoidable. Critics of negative utilitarianism often highlight its potential for extreme conclusions. They argue that an obsessive focus on Eliminating suffering could lead to moral decisions that overlook the value of happiness, joy, and fulfillment. For example, if one takes the logic of negative utilitarianism to its extreme, it might justify actions that eliminate all sentient life to prevent future suffering, a scenario that raises serious ethical and practical concerns. While most negative utilitarians reject such drastic interpretations, the possibility reveals the tension inherent in the philosophy. Another challenge for negative utilitarianism lies in the complexity of measuring suffering. Pain is subjective and varies greatly among individuals and contexts. What one person finds unbearable, another might endure with relative ease. This variability complicates efforts to apply negative utilitarianism consistently, especially on a societal level. How do we weigh the suffering of different individuals or groups? How do we balance immediate pain against the potential for long-term well-being? Despite these challenges, negative utilitarianism offers valuable insights into ethical decision-making. It pushes us to prioritize the reduction of suffering in situations where resources are limited and difficult choices must be made. In global health, for instance, this framework can guide policies that focus on treating the most severe illnesses or alleviating the most pressing hardships. By centering suffering, negative utilitarianism ensures that the most urgent needs are addressed first, providing a clear moral imperative to help those in the greatest distress. Negative utilitarianism also invites us to rethink our relationship with suffering on a personal level. It challenges the cultural narratives that glorify suffering as a path to growth or achievement, instead emphasizing the moral importance of compassion and care. By recognizing the weight of suffering, we can develop a greater sense of empathy and responsibility toward others, striving to create a world where unnecessary pain is minimized. Ultimately, negative utilitarianism is not about denying the value of happiness, but about recognizing the profound moral urgency of suffering. It calls us to confront the darker aspects of existence with honesty and resolve, reminding us that even small acts of kindness and care can make a significant difference. While the philosophy may raise difficult questions and invite criticism, it also highlights a truth that resonates deeply. Alleviating suffering is a fundamental and deeply human goal, one that transcends cultural and philosophical divides. It asks us not to abandon the pursuit of happiness, but to ensure that in that pursuit we do not lose sight of those who are suffering the most. Ism life is a mistake, not just human life, but all life. The predator hunting its prey, the insect devoured by a larger beast, the endless cycle of birth, suffering, and death. Ism, a radical philosophy, doesn't just question human existence, it questions the very fabric of life itself. It asks us to consider an unsettling idea: what if the kindest, most ethical act isn't to sustain life, but to end it? Imagine a factory that's been running for billions of years. It sits out living beings endlessly, each one programmed to fight for survival, experience suffering, and inevitably die. This factory isn't guided by intelligence or purpose. It runs blindly, its only goal being the replication of DNA. This is the process of evolution, the engine of life. Epists argue that this machine is fundamentally broken, and worse, it is cruel. Life, they claim, is a mindless system that perpetuates suffering for no higher reason. To understand this, let's look at nature. Picture a lion chasing a zebra. To survive, the lion must kill and eat the zebra. The zebra, desperate to live, flees in terror. But neither animal chose this game. The lion hunts out of hunger, and the zebra runs out of fear. The suffering of one is the survival of the other. Nature's so-called balance is at its core a bloodbath. Epists see this as not just a tragedy, but as evidence that life itself is inherently flawed. But epismuth world, it applies its critique to human life as well. Think about your daily existence. Even in the best circumstances, we are burdened by the inevitabilities of aging, illness, and death. Our joys are fleeting, and our struggles are unending. For every moment of happiness, there are countless moments of frustration, loss, and despair. And this isn't just true for humans. Every sentient being, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, is caught in the same trap. Epilus' argument is simple, yet profound. Evolution, the process that brought life into existence, doesn't care about the well-being of the creatures it creates. Its only purpose is to ensure survival and reproduction, no matter the cost. In this sense, life is not a miracle or a gift. It is a relentless cycle of need, pain, and eventual death. Epists believe that continuing this cycle is not just pointless, but ethically wrong. Now, imagine you're holding a switch. If you flip it, all life in the universe would painlessly cease to exist. No more suffering, no more fear, no more endless struggle. Would you do it? This thought experiment captures the essence of ism. It is not a philosophy born of hatred for life, but of compassion for all living beings trapped in its cycle. Epists argue that true kindness lies in ending suffering altogether, even if that means extinguishing life itself. Critics of ism often label it as extreme or nihilistic, but epists counter that their perspective is rooted in logic and empathy. They ask, if you wouldn't willingly subject someone to endless pain and hardship, why would you allow the continuation of a system that guarantees suffering for countless beings? For epists, the solution is clear: to stop the factory, to end the machine, to bring life's cruel experiment to a close. It's a perspective that shocks, provokes, and challenges the very foundations of how we view existence. Ism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting truths. Instead, it forces us to confront life's harshest realities and ask ourselves an impossible question: is existence worth the cost? What if having children is the most selfish thing you can ever do? This might sound strange and controversial, but it's a foundation of a philosophy called antinatalism. To understand, let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine you hold a magical key. This key has the power to bring someone into existence, a brand new person who will experience life in all its glory and its suffering. But here's the catch: the life you create will come with no guarantees. It might be filled with joy and wonder, or it might be marked by unbearable pain and despair. The person you create has no say in whether they want to exist. The decision is entirely yours. Would you turn the key? This question lies at the heart of antinatalism, a philosophy that argues against creating new life. One of its most prominent thinkers, David Beneder, offers a thought-provoking rationale in his book Better Never to Have Been. He introduces the idea of an asymmetry in existence. If someone isn't born, they don't experience pain, which is good. They also don't experience happiness. But since they don't exist, they don't miss it. On the other hand, if someone is born, they inevitably suffer, even if they also experience joy. Beneder argues that the avoidance of harm outweighs the potential benefits of pleasure. In his view, the act of creating life is fundamentally unjust because it imposes suffering on someone who had no choice in the matter. But antinatalism isn't just about philosophical puzzles. It's also rooted in the harsh realities of the world we live in. Think about the countless forms of suffering that exist: poverty, illness, war, and environmental collapse, even in the most privileged lives. There's heartbreak, anxiety, and the inescapable fear of death. Every new life created is another being thrust into this unpredictable and often cruel theater. Some antinatalists argue that in a world where suffering is so pervasive, bringing a new person into existence is an act of willful ignorance or selfishness. The philosophy also intersects with ethical questions about our responsibility to others. Philosopher Julio Cabrera, another influential voice in antinatalism, takes a moral approach. He argues that procreation violates the principles of ethical behavior. According to Cabrera, the act of creating life disregards the consent of the person being born. It imposes risks and burdens without their agreement, making procreation a morally questionable act. Cabrera goes further, suggesting that bringing a child into the world is not an act of love, but an act of power, a decision made unilaterally by the parent beyond individual suffering. Antinatalism also addresses the collective impact of human existence. Environmental thinkers like Lesson Knight, founder of the voluntary human extinction movement, argue that ceasing human reproduction could be a compassionate choice not just for humans, but for the planet itself. Knight's perspective is rooted in the undeniable fact that human activity has caused immense harm to the Earth, from deforestation to climate change. The ecological cost of humanity is staggering. Antinatalists like Knight see a world without humans not as a tragedy, but as a return to balance, a world where nature can thrive without the destructive presence of our species. But what about the joys of life, the laughter of children, the warmth of love, the thrill of discovery? Don't these make existence worthwhile? Antinatalist would counter that these joys are fleeting, and they are often outweighed by the inescapable pain that life brings. For every moment of happiness, there is a shadow of loss, the weight of uncertainty, and the inevitability of suffering. Even those who find meaning in their lives must confront the harsh truth that their existence will one day end often in pain or fear. To antinatalists, the beauty of life does not erase its inherent cruelty. Critics of antinatalism often accuse it of being too pessimistic, even nihilistic, but many antinatalists would disagree. They argue that their philosophy is not about hating life or despairing over existence. Instead, it's about compassion. It's about recognizing the immense burden of life and choosing not to impose it on another being. In this sense, antinatalism is not a rejection of humanity, but a profound act of empathy. Let's return to that magical key. Would you use it knowing the risks? Would you invite someone into a world where suffering is certain, even if happiness is possible? Or would you choose to leave the key untouched, sparing them the pain and uncertainty of existence? Antinatalism doesn't demand an answer, only asks us to consider the question. And in doing so, it challenges one of the most fundamental assumptions of human life, that creating new life is always a good thing. Voluntary human extinction movement. Picture a world without humans, no pollution, no deforestation, no species driven to extinction by human activity. This is the vision of the voluntary human extinction movement, a provocative and deeply controversial ideology that proposes a simple but radical solution to humanity's environmental impact: that humans should voluntarily stop reproducing and allow our species to fade into extinction for the benefit of the planet and all other forms of life. The voluntary human extinction movement is not about hatred of humanity or advocating harm. At its core, it is rooted in compassion for the planet, for future generations, and for the countless species whose existence is threatened by human activity. Its founder, Les Yite, articulated the movement philosophy as one of voluntary action. He argues that humanity's dominance over the earth has caused unparalleled harm, and the most ethical response is to step aside, allowing the natural world to heal and thrive without us. The movement asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity's impact as a species. We have reshaped ecosystems, altered the climate, and driven countless species to extinction. Every year, vast tracts of forests are cleared for agriculture, oceans are polluted with plastic, and the atmosphere is filled with greenhouse gases. The voluntary human extinction movement suggests that these issues are not just byproducts of mismanagement or inefficiency, but inherent to the existence of a species as dominant and resource-intensive as humanity. Supporters of the movement argue that even the most sustainable human practices come at a cost to other life forms, while efforts to reduce our footprint through renewable energy conservation and sustainable agriculture are vital. They contend that these measures are insufficient to address the deeper issue: humanity's sheer scale and consumption. For them, voluntary extinction is not a statement of despair, but an act of altruism, a way to prioritize the needs of the planet over the perpetuation of a single species. Critics of the voluntary human extinction movement raise several objections. One of the most common is that it dismisses humanity's capacity for positive change. Humans, after all, are not only destructive, but also creative and compassionate. We have developed technologies that can restore damaged ecosystems, discovered ways to mitigate climate change, and advocated for the rights of other species. Critics argue that instead of disappearing, humanity should focus on becoming better stewards of the earth. Finding ways to coexist harmoniously with other life forms. Another critique is the philosophical question of whether extinction is inherently better for the planet. Without humans, the natural world would undoubtedly recover, but the cycle of life would still involve suffering, predation, disease, and competition are fundamental aspects of ecosystems. The absence of humans might alleviate certain pressures, but it would not eliminate pain and struggle from the natural world. The movement also sparks ethical questions about how humanity values itself. Is it possible to promote voluntary extinction without diminishing the inherent worth of human life? Supporters of the movement believe it is emphasizing that their philosophy is not about misanthropy or self-hatred, but about recognizing humanity's unique position of responsibility. By choosing not to reproduce, they argue we acknowledge the power we hold over the planet and make a conscious decision to reduce harm. The voluntary human extinction movement forces us to think deeply about the nature of progress and our place in the world. It challenges the assumption that growth, whether economic, technological, or population-based, is inherent currently good. Instead, it asks whether true progress might lie in restraint and stepping back to allow other forms of life to flourish. This perspective shifts the focus from human-centric narratives of achievement to a broader view of the planet as a shared home. While the movement's ultimate goal may seem extreme or unrealistic, its underlying message resonates with many who are concerned about the state of the environment. It highlights the urgency of addressing humanity's impact and sparks important conversations about sustainability, ethics, and the future of life on Earth. Whether or not one agrees with the idea of voluntary extinction, the movement serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activity and the moral responsibility that comes with being the dominant species. The voluntary human extinction movement does not seek to impose its philosophy on others. Instead, it invites reflection on the long-term implications of our choices as individuals and as a species. In doing so, it challenges us to confront not only the environmental crisis, but also the values and assumptions that shape how we live. The idea may be unsettling, but its purpose is to provoke thought, encouraging us to imagine a world where humanity's legacy is one of compassion, not destruction. Whether humanity chooses to adapt, change, or fade away, the questions raised by the voluntary human extinction movement will remain relevant as we navigate the complex relationship between progress and preservation. Quietism. What if the best way to solve the problems of life is to stop trying to solve them altogether? This is the provocative idea at the heart of quietism, a philosophy that encourages us to let go of the struggle for answers and accept life as it is. Quietism isn't about resignation or defeat. It's about stepping back from the endless noise of human ambition and finding peace in simplicity and stillness. To understand quietism, imagine a person standing in a river fighting against the current. They expend all their energy struggling to move forward only to stay in the same place or be swept backward. Quietism suggests that instead of resisting the flow of the river, we should surrender to it, allowing ourselves to be carried along. This doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing the futility of certain struggles and choosing a path of harmony instead. The origins of quietism can be traced to various philosophical and spiritual traditions in Western philosophy. It is often associated with figures like Paro, the ancient Greek philosopher who founded skepticism. Paro believed that certainty about life's big questions is impossible and that striving for such certainty only leads to anxiety and frustration. His solution was to embrace a state of suspension where one refrains from making definitive judgments and instead approaches life with equanimity and openness. For Paro, this state of detachment was the key to achieving inner peace in early modern Europe. Quietism took on a spiritual dimension with the work of thinkers like Miguel de Molinos, a Spanish priest who advocated for a contemplative life focused on surrender to the divine. Molinos argued that the soul finds true peace not through effort or action, but through complete stillness and trust in God. This version of quietism emphasized the futility of human striving in the face of divine will and called for a radical acceptance of life circumstances, quietism is not limited to Western tradition. In many ways, it resonates with Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The test concept of wa, or effortless action, aligns closely with the quietist idea of non-striving. Similarly, Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of letting go of attachment and embracing the present moment. As it is, while these traditions have distinct cultural and historical contexts, they share a common picture: the belief that peace comes not from control or achievement, but from surrender and acceptance. One of the central challenges of quietism is its apparent passivity. Critics argue that it can be an excuse for inaction or a way to avoid responsibility. If we simply accept life as it is, aren't we turning a blind eye to suffering and injustice? Quietists would counter that their philosophy is not about indifference, but about perspective. They suggest that much of our suffering comes not from the world itself, but from our attempts to impose our will on it. By stepping back, we can see things more clearly and act with wisdom and compassion rather than being driven by ego or desperation. In the realm of philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work reflects a quietist approach. Wittgenstein argued that many philosophical problems arise from the misuse of language, and that once we understand this, the problems dissolve on their own. He famously wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." For Wittgenstein, the role of philosophy was not to provide solutions, but to show the limits of our understanding and help us find peace within those limits. Quietism also has implications for how we approach personal and societal challenges in a world obsessed with productivity, progress, and self-improvement. Quietism offers a countercultural perspective. It invites us to question whether our relentless pursuit of more success, more knowledge, more control is truly making us happier, or whether it is simply creating more stress and dissatisfaction. By stepping back from the constant cycle of striving, we may discover a deeper sense of contentment and clarity despite its emphasis on stillness and acceptance. Quietism is not a one-size-fits-all philosophy. It requires careful reflection and balance. For some, it may be a way to navigate the existential uncertainties of life. For others, it may serve as a reminder to slow down and focus on what truly matters. In either case, quietism challenges us to rethink our relationship with action and inaction, with control and surrender. Ultimately, quietism is a philosophy of simplicity. It doesn't promise easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, it offers a profound shift in perspective, a way to find peace not by changing the world, but by changing how we engage with it. In a noisy and chaotic world, quietism invites us to embrace silence, stillness, and the quiet power of letting go. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in striving for more, but in learning to be content with less.